the best commentaries from the last video. Subscribe to see more stories.
I had spent nearly 2 weeks on a business trip, a whirlwind of meetings, long hours at airport lounges, and many sleepless nights, and nothing could have prepared me for the quiet, subtle changes awaiting me at home. My name is Jonathan Red, and I always assumed that coming back would bring comfort and relief. Instead, my return sparked an uneasy feeling that seemed to seep into every corner of the house I once knew so well. The ride home was quiet, the constant hum of the highway mirroring my troubled thoughts. When I arrived, a sudden chill ran down my spine. Although the outside looked immaculate, something felt off. The garden was perfectly tended, and the lights shone warmly, yet I couldn't shake the strange impression that I was entering a space that wasn't entirely mine. Inside, the welcoming atmosphere was deceptive. I noticed a note on the kitchen counter, a small sticky message in Ella's neat handwriting that read, "Dinner's ready, love." The thought of her greeting me after such a long time almost made me smile. Ella had always been the heart of our home, a loving wife and a graceful hostess, but as I ventured further inside, small inconsistencies began to catch my eye. At first, it was just the little details. The living room furniture had been rearranged ever so slightly, the sofa cushion now wore a different color from the one I remembered. Our bookshelf had been reorganized, and a few of my favorite novels were missing from their usual spots. I figured these changes might be a burst of creativity or simply an effort to refresh the look, until I climbed the stairs to our bedroom. There, on my nightstand, lay something that made my blood run cold, a wedding ring that wasn't mine. It wasn't an ordinary piece of jewelry, it was delicate, intricately designed, and clearly unfamiliar. The soft shine of gold and its detailed patterns hinted at a meaning I wasn't ready to face. My heart raced as I turned the ring over in my hand, its weight a bitter reminder of promises made long ago that now seemed shattered. That first night, I drifted in a haze of disbelief and denial. I tossed and turned, haunted by the image of that ring. I tried to tell myself it was just a mistake, a misplacement or an accidental gift. But as dawn broke, reality seeped in more subtly than the soft light filtering through the curtains. The next day, I decided to observe my home quietly, almost as if I were a stranger there. I watched how Ella moved through each room with a curious mix of ease and caution, as if she were hiding something. There was an uncharacteristic elegance in her actions, a calm detachment I'd never seen before. I began questioning everything, from the slightly shifted arrangement of our belongings to the unusual scent of a new perfume lingering in the air. My mind was in turmoil. Could it be that Ella had been unfaithful? The thought was both unthinkable and agonizing. Memories of our shared laughter and whispered secrets clashed with the growing evidence of betrayal. I wasn't one to make wild accusations without solid proof, yet the clear evidence, the ring, could not be dismissed. I started piecing together the puzzle during those quiet hours when Ella was away or busy. I searched for any clues that might reveal the hidden truth. Late one afternoon, while she was supposedly at the grocery store, I combed through our home for any sign of intrusion that might explain the ring's presence. My eyes caught sight of a receipt tucked between the pages of a magazine on the coffee table, a receipt for a piece of jewelry I had never seen before. I wasn't sure if it belonged to her or someone else, but it only deepened my suspicions. That night, I began mapping out all the changes in my mind. I remembered small incidents from earlier in my trip, a phone buzzing quietly when Ella was in another room, a rushed whisper when she thought I wasn't listening, a door left slightly open when privacy was needed. Each of these moments now carried a hint of possible infidelity. The more I watched, the stronger my resolve to uncover the truth became. I set up a discreet system to record everyone coming and going around the house. I installed a few small cameras in spots where they wouldn't be noticed, a decision I made with a heavy heart, knowing I was crossing a line I never thought I would cross. Yet, when your heart is broken, desperation pushes you to do things you once believed were unthinkable. In just a few days, a pattern began to emerge. Whenever Ella left for a short errand or was occupied elsewhere, a mysterious man would sometimes appear. At first, it was only fleeting, an unfamiliar face caught through a window or keys left on the counter that weren't mine. As I gathered more observations, the evidence became impossible to ignore. I eventually mustered the courage to face the possibility that the man, whom I later learned was named Miguel, was not merely an occasional visitor, but someone who had quietly made his way into our home. Each new discovery felt like a painful blow to my heart. Miguel wasn't just a fleeting fling, he had become a recurring figure in Ella's life, a constant reminder of her betrayal. I decided to document every detail with care. I began a private journal, writing down every observation, every small change in behavior, every piece of evidence that confirmed my worst fears. My once peaceful home had transformed into a stage for a painful drama, where every moment unfolded like a scene in a play of deception. In the quiet of my study, with the soft glow of a desk lamp casting long shadows on the walls, I poured my anguish and disbelief onto paper. I wondered how a love that had once felt so strong could crumble under the weight of treachery. The questions tormented me: when did our bond begin to crack? How did I miss the signs? And most importantly, how would I ever face the betrayal that now defined our life? By the end of the week, I had gathered enough evidence that I could no longer live in uncertainty. The steady, calculated visits from Miguel, the carelessly left ring, and the growing distance between Ella and me wove together an undeniable tapestry of deceit. With every new detail, my heart ached, but that pain also ignited a grim determination within me. I decided to set a trap, a carefully planned move to catch both Ella and Miguel together and force the truth out into the open. I was no longer just a wounded husband, I had become a man resolved to take back control of my shattered life. I planned the upcoming confrontation with utmost care, fully aware that the stakes were higher than ever before. In my mind, I already pictured a future where I would sell the house, dismantling the facade of dreams we once shared. The very walls that once echoed with our laughter would soon witness my final act of reclaiming freedom. As this bitter chapter of my life neared its end, I couldn't help but feel that every small detail, every minor change, had led me to this inevitable crossroads. The house, once a symbol of our shared life, had become a tomb for broken promises. And in the quiet realization of that truth, I vowed to confront the painful reality head-on, even if it meant leaving everything behind. I sat at my desk, the evidence laid out like a map of betrayal, and prepared to write the next chapter of my life, a chapter filled with harsh truths and irreversible decisions. The road ahead was uncertain, but one thing was clear: I would no longer allow myself to remain a victim. The trap was set, and soon, the painful deception would finally be exposed. After discovering the truth, every day blurred into the next with a force that left me feeling both desperate and resolute. I, Jonathan Red, found myself caught in a spiral of grim thoughts and deliberate planning. The home that once provided comfort had turned into a trial by fire, where trust was melting away, soon to be recast into an unforgiving shape. I had gathered ample proof, and now it was time to face the harsh reality of Ella's betrayal. The decisive moment arrived on a seemingly ordinary Tuesday. Ella, ever graceful, left for what she claimed was a routine errand. Yet this time, instead of keeping secrets, she unintentionally left behind traces: a discarded scarf carrying an unfamiliar scent and a text message on her phone displaying a timestamp and the name Miguel. Every small clue only intensified my determination to expose the full extent of her deception. That evening, I began carefully orchestrating a trap to force the truth out. I dedicated hours to reviewing footage from the hidden cameras I'd set up around the house. Each clip served as a stark reminder of the life I once thought I shared with Ella. The recordings unveiled patterns I had been too afraid to confront: her relaxed smiles with a man who now appeared to be a permanent presence in our home. It was a painful confirmation that my worst fears had come true. I quickly realized that confronting Ella on her own would likely result in a flood of denials and empty apologies. I needed undeniable evidence of their closeness, a moment when their charade would finally crumble. The idea struck me suddenly: create a situation where both Ella and Miguel would be caught in the act, with no room left for excuses or half-truths. For days, I meticulously planned every detail of this trap. I adjusted the cameras so they captured every angle of the living room, the hallway, and even the secluded corners of our bedroom. Precision was key. Any oversight might allow them to slip away, and I couldn't risk another minute under this shroud of deceit. The night chosen for the trap was marked by a raging storm, a perfect setting to mirror the turmoil in my heart. Thunder roared as if nature itself was voicing my anger. On that fateful night, I returned home early, under the pretense of an unexpected change at work. The silence in the house was almost overwhelming as I waited, each tick of the clock amplifying my inner unrest. I could hear my heartbeat echoing in time with the relentless rain on the windows. I concealed myself in a dark corner of the living room, my eyes fixed on the door Ella typically used for her secret outings. Every creak and every faint sound in the darkness sent my pulse racing. Before long, I heard clear footsteps approaching. Ella had returned, her expression forced into a calm facade. She appeared visibly uneasy, her hands trembling slightly as she set her purse on the table. Moments later, the door creaked again, and Miguel stepped in. The room fell into an almost surreal quiet, as if time had paused to witness the climax of my heartbreak. I watched from my hiding spot, unable to look away as the scene unfolded. Miguel's assured stride and Ella's reluctant smile painted a picture of forbidden intimacy, a jarring contrast to the happier memories I once held dear. The red light of the camera blinked steadily, capturing every incriminating detail. Each second deepened the sting of betrayal. This wasn't merely physical cheating, it was a deliberate dismantling of every promise and secret we had once cherished. Even though the trap had been set perfectly, a wave of both anger and sorrow washed over me as I observed them. Miguel wasn't just a fleeting visitor, he had slowly eroded the very foundation of what I believed our marriage to be. Yet, amid all this pain, I felt an unexpected clarity. I was no longer the trusting husband I once was. I had become a man determined to shape his own destiny and confront deception head-on. In that moment, I decided not to explode with accusations in a burst of anger but to continue gathering the final pieces of evidence. I recorded every whispered word and every tender gesture between them, noting particularly the way Ella spoke about a new beginning that no longer included me. Their voices, heavy with guilt and desire, completed the grim portrait of betrayal. The trap did more than capture secret meetings, it exposed the systematic collapse of our shared life. Every stolen kiss and hushed conversation confirmed that the home I had built with Ella was now under siege from within. As I sat there in the darkness, the weight of my choices bore down on me. I was driven by a need for retribution, for a justice that was personal and unwavering. After what seemed like an eternity, Ella and Miguel finally left, leaving the house filled with a silence heavy with unspoken truths. I emerged from my hiding place, my hands shaking with a mixture of relief and profound sorrow. I knew that a direct confrontation was inevitable, but at that moment, I also felt that I had regained some control. The evidence was undeniable, and with it, I could no longer live a lie. In the following days, I replayed the recordings over and over. Each viewing was a bitter reminder of what had transpired and pushed me toward my next steps. I began writing messages to trusted friends and even thought about seeking legal advice. I knew that once this confrontation went public, there would be no turning back. The house, our shared memories, and everything we had built would soon crumble under the weight of this betrayal. As I considered my next move, a cold and clear plan took shape. I decided that the final act of reclaiming my dignity was to completely cut ties with the past. Selling the house, the very place where our hopes and dreams once thrived, would symbolize my total break from the life I once knew. It wasn't merely about physical assets, it was about reclaiming the person I had lost to deceit. The trap wasn't just aimed at Ella and Miguel, it was also a way for me to force both the truth and my inner strength into the light. I rehearsed the confrontation in my mind, wondering how Ella might react, whether she would show regret or try to justify her actions. What mattered most was that I refused to remain a passive victim of betrayal. I was determined to take control of my own destiny. After the trap was sprung and the storm finally subsided, I sat alone in the living room. The evidence lay before me like a list of broken promises and shattered dreams. I realized that while a direct confrontation was looming, the most important struggle was within me, a battle for dignity, self-respect, and the freedom to leave behind a life that had become a gilded cage. Days turned into weeks as I plotted the next phase of my plan. I was no longer a man ensnared in a web of lies, I was transforming that web into a tool for my liberation. The recordings, the messages, the hidden clues, all formed an irrefutable case against the life I once believed was ours. And in that case, the only verdict that would satisfy me was one that allowed me to reclaim everything I had lost, my pride, my identity, and ultimately, my future. In the quiet hours of many nights, I pondered the cost of freedom. I knew the road ahead would be lined with pain, regret, and the irreversible loss of our shared past. Yet, the thought of living under the constant shadow of betrayal was far more unbearable. I resolved to sell the house, the tangible reminder of our broken marriage, and with it, erase the remnants of a life that no longer belonged to me. As I prepared to take these irreversible steps, I couldn't shake the feeling that the trap I had set was not just a means to catch them, but a turning point in my life. The evidence of their infidelity, once a symbol of my downfall, was now the foundation upon which I would rebuild my future. Every hidden truth, every secret I had recorded, was a step toward a life unburdened by lies. In that cold, resolute moment, I embraced what was to come. The confrontation was arranged, the evidence was solid, and my path forward was clear, even if it meant dismantling the home that once held my dreams. The storm had passed, and in its wake, I emerged not as a broken man, but as someone reborn from the ashes of betrayal, determined to reclaim every piece of his shattered self. Thus, with the trap firmly in place and the first act of retribution complete, I steeled myself for the inevitable confrontation, a moment that would change the course of our lives forever. The days after I set the trap passed in a haze of sleepless nights and constant inner conflict. I, Jonathan Red, felt as though I were standing on the edge of a cliff, with every thought of her betrayal threatening to pull me into a deep pit of despair. The recordings lay before me, a damning mix of hushed confessions, secretive glances, and stolen kisses. I decided it was time to face them directly and put an end to this painful charade once and for all. The morning of the confrontation arrived with an unsettling stillness. I woke before dawn, feeling the weight of what was to come pressed down on me like a heavy blanket. I walked back and forth through the empty halls of our home, each step echoing with memories of happier times, a time when the house rang with laughter and love, not doubt and betrayal. In that silence, I practiced every word and tone I might use when I finally stood before Ella and Miguel. This was not the time for outbursts or desperate pleas, it was a moment for clear, unwavering resolve. Around noon, Ella returned from her errands. Her face, once warm and familiar, now showed a mask of nervous worry. The space between us felt thick with unspoken truths, and I could almost see a flicker of guilt in her eyes. I greeted her with a quiet nod, my smile strained, as if it were a fragile mask hiding the storm inside. I knew that beneath her calm look lay a whirlwind of secrets and lies that would soon be revealed. We sat in the living room as the silence grew heavier with every minute that passed. I watched her fidget with the hem of her blouse, a small gesture that betrayed her inner tension. I had long learned that words were useless when feelings ran so deep, only actions and clear evidence mattered now. Taking a deep breath, I decided that waiting any longer would be cowardly. I reached into my desk drawer and pulled out the small flash drive containing every piece of damning evidence I had recorded. It was time to break the delicate calm that had misled us for so long. "Ella," I said, my voice steady and filled with a cold finality, "we need to talk." That single word hung in the air like a warning of what was to come. For a moment, her eyes widened slightly, and I caught a glimpse of the kind, caring woman I once knew, a woman who had loved me without hesitation. But that brief glimpse faded quickly, replaced by a hard, distant look. Before she could respond, there was a knock on the door. My heart began to pound slowly, echoing like a foreboding drum as I realized Miguel had returned. The sound made it clear that this moment was inevitable, and I knew there was no more delaying the confrontation. Ella excused herself to answer the door, and as she did, Miguel entered with an air of calm confidence that belied the seriousness of the situation. For a moment, the room felt as if it were shrinking, with the walls closing in around the three of us. I could see Miguel's eyes darting between Ella and me, as if he were trying to decide whether to run or fight. But I had made up my mind, retreat was not an option. The past few weeks had hardened my resolve. I was no longer the trusting husband who welcomed every guest with a smile. I was there to reclaim the dignity that had been stripped away. "Miguel," I said, my tone as cold as the winter winds howling outside, "we need to have a serious conversation." My simple words carried a storm of emotions underneath. For a moment, Ella's eyes showed panic, and I saw a flash of regret on her face. But it was too late for apologies. Too many promises had been broken, too many lies told. I then focused on the small flash drive in my hand. "I have everything," I continued firmly, "every moment, every secret, every time you crossed that threshold when I wasn't around." Those words flowed out like a long-held truth finally set free. Miguel's confident look faltered as his eyes grew wide, realizing he could not hide from the evidence. Ella tried to speak, her voice trembling with desperation, but I stopped her with a raised hand. "This isn't just about me, Ella," I said, my voice a mix of pain and hardened resolve. "It's about the life we built together, the trust we shattered, and the future we can never have back." Every word hit like a hammer blow, dismantling the remnants of our shared past. The confrontation was raw, unfiltered, and unavoidable. I laid out the evidence on the coffee table, a collage of recordings, photos, and texts, each a testament to the betrayal that had unfolded behind my back. Miguel's silence spoke louder than any words. For a long, agonizing minute, no one spoke, the only sounds being the soft hum of the refrigerator and the distant patter of rain on the windows. Finally, Miguel broke his silence with a low, defeated voice, "Jonathan, I never meant for it to go this far." His apology stumbled out, empty and as hollow as the promises that had brought us here. I listened, unmoved, with no room left for excuses or half-hearted apologies. The betrayal was complete, and there was no chance for reconciliation or justification. "It doesn't matter," I replied firmly, "the damage is done." Ella's eyes filled with tears, and I felt a sting of sorrow for the woman who had lost herself in this web of lies. But that sorrow quickly gave way to a steely sense of duty, to myself, and to the truth. In that charged moment, the finality of our situation became clear. I knew that moving forward meant more than just this confrontation, it meant cutting every tie with the life that had soured. I could no longer live in a house tainted by betrayal, where every room echoed with the memory of a love that had long since faded. The decision was crystal clear in my mind: would sell the house, leaving nothing behind for Ella or Miguel. It was a harsh, cold solution, but it was the only way to rebuild my life from the ruins of our past. With the evidence exposed and the confrontation over, I felt the first signs of freedom mixing with my sorrow. The finality of my decision burned into my soul, a painful reminder that sometimes, the only way to heal is to completely tear down what once was. I turned away from the table, meeting Ella's eyes one last time, silently saying goodbye with both love and irreversible loss. As Miguel left the room without another word, a deep silence followed. The house, once a warm haven of shared memories, now felt like a tomb filled with shattered dreams. I stood there, the weight of the flash drive heavy in my hand, knowing that with this proof, I had broken the illusion that had defined our lives. The trap had succeeded, but the price of truth was steep, a price I was now ready to pay. That day marked the real start of my journey to reclaim who I was. I had confronted the betrayal head-on, and though the pain was raw and the future uncertain, I finally saw a way forward. The next steps were clear. I would move on, sell the house, and break free from the past that weighed me down. There was no turning back now, only the relentless pursuit of a life without deceit. In that defining moment, I embraced my breaking point, a time when the burden of betrayal gave way to the strength of a man ready to rise from the ashes. The confrontation had transformed me from a broken husband into someone capable of creating a new identity from the remnants of a shattered love. The undeniable evidence, the cold words exchanged, and the silent departures all converged into one unchangeable truth: my life would never be the same, and neither would I. So, as I looked around at the ruins of what once was, I knew it was time to tear down the old and build something new. The house, with every hidden corner and whispered secret, would soon be sold, a final, irrevocable act of cutting ties. With each passing moment, the promise of freedom grew stronger, pushing me toward a future where I could finally escape the chains of betrayal and reclaim every piece of my broken self. The choice I made was final. There was no going back to a past in ruins or mending what was irreparably broken. In the days after the painful confrontation, Jonathan became enveloped in a quiet resolve that slowly overpowered the lingering grief and anger. All the evidence of betrayal was laid out before me, the mask of deception had been lifted, and the life we once shared was crumbling into a series of irreversible decisions. I started by listing every asset that had once stood for our shared dreams but now only reminded me of a bond that had been permanently shattered. At the top of that list was the house, the grand stage where our memories had unfolded. It was time to cut the final tie that linked me to Ella, a final act of liberation. Selling the house was not a decision made in haste, it was a firm judgment against the betrayals that had poisoned our life together. I contacted a real estate agent and arranged for a discreet evaluation of the property. The process was clinical, a necessary detachment from the emotional storm that had gripped me. I observed the agent moving through each room with professional objectivity, measuring spaces and taking photographs. Every shutter click echoed like the final toll of a bell, and with each room documented and every square foot measured, I felt the house slowly release its hold on me, a home no longer haunted by echoes of broken promises. When Ella learned of my plan to sell, she could only watch in dismay as the final remnants of our shared life were dismantled one by one. The conversations that once flowed with warmth and compromise had grown cold, and although her protests were passionate, they fell on deaf ears. I had decided that I would leave her with nothing, forcing her to confront the full consequences of her betrayal in the harshest terms. Selling the house was more than a financial transaction, it was the ultimate severing of our past, a clear step to regain every bit of dignity lost to deception. On the day the contract was signed, I walked through the now empty halls one last time. Every room and corridor echoed with laughter and sorrow from days long gone. I paused in the foyer, where sunlight once danced off polished surfaces and whispered of hope, and now cast long, somber shadows over a life that had ended bitterly. I took one final look around, committing every detail to memory before stepping out and leaving behind a life that had become too painful to bear. After the paperwork was complete, I settled the finances with a cold efficiency that surprised even me. The proceeds from the sale were deposited into an account I would soon use to start over, an opportunity to rebuild myself and create a future free from the betrayal that had once defined my world. Each cent symbolized not just the value of a building, but also the weight of a promise to myself: never again would I allow my identity to be dictated by someone else's actions. Ella was left with nothing but the shattered remains of our once united life, a bitter irony that underscored the finality of my choice. The house, with all its memories and echoes, now belonged to someone else, standing as a symbol of a past I had deliberately closed off. I had not only sold the physical home but also rid myself of the emotional baggage that had dragged me through despair. In doing so, I vowed to carve out a path free from the chains of betrayal. The transition that followed was not without its challenges. The divorce proceedings, as inevitable as the sale itself, began with the cold precision of legal process. I attended each meeting and negotiation with the detachment of a man who had already shed the weight of a crumbling marriage. The legal matters were handled with an efficiency that belied the deep emotional toll they exacted. Ella's attempts to hold on to remnants of her old life were met with the unyielding logic of someone who had been hurt too deeply to hope for reconciliation. The final day of the proceedings came with an almost surreal calm. In a sterile courtroom, the gavel struck with the finality of a verdict. The divorce was finalized, and the property along with all associated assets was divided according to the law. I watched Ella leave the courtroom with a defeated gait, her eyes empty and reflecting the mistakes that had brought us to this point. There was no anger in my look, only a quiet, firm resolve from a man forced to choose between a hopeful future and the chains of the past. With the legal ties severed, I found solace in solitude. I took time to rediscover who I was before the betrayal, before the slow loss of trust and self-worth. I spent long hours wandering quiet streets, rereading old journals, and writing down my reflections on love, betrayal, and redemption in the peaceful hours of early mornings. Every word I wrote was a small act of release, a reaffirmation of my decision to reclaim my life, no matter the cost. I started attending support groups, where I discovered that sharing our stories could pave the way to healing. In those meetings, I learned I was not alone in my pain, that the scars of betrayal were common and, with time, could be healed. I listened to others who had walked similar dark paths, and slowly, the seeds of renewal began to sprout in the broken soil of my heart. The journey to rebuild was slow, and some days were tougher than others. Memories would surface unexpectedly, each one carrying the sting of betrayal and the bitter taste of regret. Yet, I met every challenge with the resilience I had forged through months of reflection and decisive action. I vowed not to let my past define me, a past filled with false promises and shattered vows. Selling the house and finalizing the divorce were not the end of my story, they marked the first lines of a new chapter defined by self-respect and the promise of a future free from deceit. Now, as I stand on the threshold of this new beginning, I feel a quiet strength growing within me, a strength born from the ashes of betrayal, hardened in the fires of painful truth, and fortified by the determination never to be a victim again. The final reckoning was more than a moment of loss, it was a profound transformation, the metamorphosis of a man who chose to rise above the ruins of his past. In the end, cutting ties, selling the house and leaving Ella with nothing, was as much an act of liberation as it was an act of justice. It marked the end of a chapter filled with sorrow and betrayal and the start of a journey toward reclaiming every piece of the man I once was. As I step into this uncertain future, I carry the lessons of the past with me, a reminder that even in the darkest moments, the promise of renewal and rebirth is always within reach.